Thank you very much, Ken. And it's, I think, very timely and certainly an honor for our panelists to be invited and to have an opportunity to address you during this Trace Evidence Symposium. One of the things that's very apparent is that we have excellent representation of forensic science practitioners and the relevant criminal justice community represented here. And one of the things which is not lost on the objectives of this subcommittee on forensic science is the unique situation in the United States, unlike the UK and France and Germany and many of the other Western civilized countries where forensic science is largely provided at the federal level. In the United States, thanks to our Constitution and state sovereignty, we have over 95% of all forensic science analysis done at the state and local level. The role that the federal government plays is, in many cases, more for the purposes of providing support and guidance and structure than it is to actually perform the analysis. And consequently, that unique aspect of the geopolitical structure of forensic science community in the United States, on the one hand, poses certain problems that were highlighted in the NAS report, saying that the community as a whole is largely fragmented, and consequently, improvements that are made, policies that are created, are very difficult to implement with over 400 individually autonomous crime laboratories at the state and local level. So the challenge is there, and I wanted to begin my remarks this morning by telling you how much we understand that the success of this subcommittee depends on the degree to which we can manage to solicit and obtain and digest input from the 95% non-federal forensic science community. Guidance and implementation is important at the federal level, but unlike many other programs and communities, this particular NSTC subcommittee must have the input and technology transfer to state and locals. That means state and local government agencies, but it also means private sector, criminal justice, community participants that include judges and prosecutors and defense and professional organizations and all of those who have a vested interest and who impact and are impacted by forensic science. So it's a big mandate, and we have a very large audience, but we want you to know that we understand. And I speak to you at the moment as a federal employee working for the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and I have for the past year. But for 37 years before that, I was in either the private sector or state crime laboratories in Illinois and Michigan. So I understand firsthand the frustrations in trying to develop and maintain good partnerships with the federal government. So hopefully I can remember what that feels like and try to implement an effective outreach. And one of the things that you'll hear today is from our panelist who is in the Interagency Working Group for Outreach and Communications. And we have dedicated a specific working group for that purpose. So it is a serious, we take that responsibility very seriously. The subcommittee itself was officially chartered July 7th, as Ken said, and the subcommittee itself is put together with ultimately responsibility for implementation by review of the co-chairs of the subcommittee. And there is a co-chair from the White House in Dwayne Blackburn, whose expertise is in policy, and two subject matter co-chairs in Ken and myself in the area of criminal justice and forensic science, and as a forensic science practitioner on my level. I also represent NIST, so because of the fact that standards are a critical part, that was cited in the recommendations that you'll hear about from our panelists today, it is timely for me to be in a position to represent the National Institute of Standards and Technology for implementation of recommendations which come from this panel and come from the forensic science community at large. Again, I think that it's worth saying that we want broad inclusion, and the way the subcommittee was structured initially was to reach out with the charter that we have enabling us to get input from all of these federal agencies. As you can see, each one of them that is listed there has a forensic science laboratory or forensic science laboratory services that serve the needs of those agencies. And this is a starting point. We have selected 5 interagency groups, and you'll be hearing from the co-chairs or members of each of these groups today. Their research development, let me back up. These 5 committees were created by consolidating the categories of the 13 recommendations from the National Academy of Science report. And one of the reasons that we're not providing a list at the introduction of what those recommendations are is that you'll hear them in each of these particular working group descriptions. But we embodied those 13 recommendations in categories that fit together, and they break down into roughly these 5 categories. The first is research, development, test, and evaluation. The second is standards, practices, and protocols. The third is education and ethics. The fourth is certification, accreditation, and licensing, or proficiency testing. And the fifth is outreach and communications. This is a rather detailed slide, and I won't go through it, but as you can see, what has happened is that we've pulled together from the recommendations what actions are necessary to implement strategic plans for improving forensic science capacity, infrastructure, standards, quality, and the 7 bullet points that follow are taken from individual recommendations from the NAS report. Since all of you in this room undoubtedly have either read the review or you've seen the 13 recommendations, I don't feel that I need to elaborate on them at this point. But the other thing is that you'll notice in the first 2 bullet points under inventory and analysis of forensic science challenges and activities, cataloging internal and external recommendations on how to improve methods and implementation is featured at the top of our agenda. That is what we need to do in order to get an arm around how to approach what we want to recommend to the executive branch and what we need to recommend to Congress for activities that the executive branch currently isn't authorized or doesn't have the power to implement. And we'll work with Congress and form recommendations to enable them to legislate in order to implement any of those strategies that require a change in the law in order to satisfy one of those recommendations. We also want to identify the existing and planned private and governmental efforts whose goals are to improve methods and implementation of forensic science services. One of the things you'll hear from the Education and Training Committee is that we are in desperate need of serious, formalized, well-funded college and university programs in forensic science, not just for teaching and generating a cadre of well-trained forensic science students who are prepared to enter our profession. The demand will be huge, but also to interest universities in doing serious forensic science research using the scientific methods and research tools that are available at the university level. And we have only a smattering of that in this country, and something that needs to be increased. I don't want to steal from the slides of the Education and Training Committee, but I wanted you to know that that's one example among many of identifying where in this country we already have existing programs and integrating them, or bootstrapping in order to reach higher level goals that are recommended in the NAS report. These are potential activities that are listed of RDT&E. The research, development, testing, and evaluation portion of the recommendations from the NAS will be addressed in detail in a few minutes, so I'm going to skip the bullet points here. You'll hear about each of these in the formal presentation. Standards, practices, and protocols. This particular group is going to have to spend time defining what is meant by standards and to define what we intend to do for improving practices and protocols. And there is a lot of organizational, scientific, and political implications in this particular group. Education and ethics, formal education, in-service training for practitioners who are already working, what we can do to augment significant increases in the number and quality of training, in-service training programs that are available to practitioners. And ethics, we have to develop a code of ethics or consider how we would go about developing a code of ethics that would be applied across the entire forensic science community. Accreditation and certification, as you know, the recommendations were to make them mandatory, and this presents a series of problems in terms of both implementation and funding. Outreach and communications, this is the responsibility that we have as a group to take in the existing documentation, input, and resources that are available that the NAS report didn't detect, didn't hear from witnesses, or didn't record in their report. There's a lot out there, and we need to be able to collect everything that's currently existing and do gap analysis to determine what else needs to be done. So we have a lot before us, and given the fact that all of the people who are in front of you have day jobs, we hope that we'll be able to bring the resources necessary with your help and information in our outreach in order to achieve the goals that you're going to hear are being potential goals that we'll be considering in these IWGs. And I think I've said probably more than I should have, but in any case, the other thing I wanted to tell you is that all of these things that we have so far are preliminary. We haven't taken any official stand. We have no official recommendations that need to be made, and they'll need to be vetted through all of the proper places in order to achieve that. We also don't have a formal structure yet. Oh, there's another slide I wanted to show you. We don't have a formal structure yet, either for the outreach in websites, but we're planning on creating websites. The two that were suggested here, forensicscience.gov and forensicsciencecatalog.org, are going to need approval from the White House, so we don't have that set up yet. And either these websites or some version will be intended to have an open communication with you. The other thing I wanted to mention to you, I've already addressed external collaboration. If you look at the third bullet point under charter, if you want to read the charter of our committee, it's available at ostp.gov/NSTC, and you can navigate through the Committee on Science, the Subcommittee on Forensic Science, and one of the attachments which is available is this charter. Or, and I'm sorry it's not on your handouts, but this will be made available, and certainly it's pretty long to copy, but it's public information. It is the direct URL for the charter. So we're mindful of the need for open government and transparency. That's sort of the mantra for this group, and it's a serious one that we take seriously. So at this point, we'll make the transition for the next slideshow, and Jeff, please share RDT&E with them. Thank you very much.